Public officials? Any communications from the members of the public? Okay, well, in that case, we'll now convene the assembly and we'll begin with the discussion of proposed ordinance 0911 to add Chapter H to the Code of Cape Cod Commission Regulations of General Application to create regulations pertaining to municipal application for revision of DRI thresholds. You have the minutes of the meeting that the committee had on this, and I wonder if I throw out there was some controversy as to the procedure, so I'll throw this out to the members of the assembly. I don't think we did not take a up or down vote on this. The committee did not, so it's going to be up to the commissioners. So Leo, did you have some comments?
Well, first of all, I'd like to ask through the speaker if do we need to have a motion to close the subcommittee hearing, because basically we voted to continue it to today, and the subcommittee really did not take a vote. Is there a need or a necessity to actually end that?
I'll ask our parliamentarian.
My notes indicated that you closed the public hearing. You just, it was the consensus of the committee not to make a recommendation to the assembly, but to have the broad discussion here.
And you have, you all been provided with a response from the Cape Cod Commission Council on the questions that were brought up on this, and also in the next ordinance that we'll discuss. So you should have gotten that either right now or through email. So Leo, did you want to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to first comment on the memorandum that came around. I presume you've all gotten it. It was written by Jessica from the Cape Cod Commission in regards to some of the comments that we had at our last meeting. It's my position that I don't necessarily disagree with her that the Cape Cod Commission has the legal right to change the thresholds without town meeting vote. Although I'm not an attorney, but I would love to play one on TV. I wish Jessica was here so we could debate the fact that she does take the time to take out one part of the sentence and say that they can create different standards, but when you actually read Section 12D of the Act, the entire sentence says the Commission shall propose standards and criteria specific the types for development which are likely to present development issues significant to more than one municipality in Barnstable County. And then it goes on to explain why. Again, I won't argue the fact that whether they legally have the right to do it or not. But I will stand before my fellow colleagues here today and tell you that I was at Harwich Town Meeting when Harwich did in fact adopt the Act. And I did hear presented at that meeting that the reason for the establishment of the Cape Cod Commission was to help curtail large development of 10,000 square foot buildings or larger, or subdivisions of 30 acres or more. There was a lot of concerns at Harwich Town Meeting at that time that the Cape Cod Commission may be getting involved in other things, and we were assured that that wasn't going to be the case. Unfortunately, and I apologize to my other residents in the town of Harwich, I did not read that particular section of the Act, or I'm sure they know. I would have amended it on town meeting floor, although I probably couldn't have done it legally. I at least would have brought it to their attention that that sentence is in there, and that it is, in my eyes, vague, if not maybe even legal, that they can change these thresholds without town meeting vote. I'm here before you to ask you to support me in not accepting this resolution in front of us today, and actually sending it back to the Cape Cod Commission and asking them to review the Section 5-3, and in requiring town meeting or town council vote to in fact change the thresholds. I spent the last 3 weeks after we talked about this talking to many people in the town of Harwich, of which I represent, and not one person came forward to me and told me that they thought it was right that this be done without town meeting vote. Now, I will tell you that Harwich, and the people that I certainly know in the town of Harwich, enjoy town meeting, participate in town meeting, come there very educated in what articles are there, and put a lot of time and effort into it. And a lot of them have told me and expressed to me that they have no problem with the town's ability to change the thresholds, but do believe that it should be a town meeting vote requirement. I find it hard to believe that, again, you could, and I won't get into the specifics of the whole act because they kind of overlap with each other, but that I look at the map up behind me, if you look at the town of Falmouth or the section of Barnstable in the middle that has an economic development center in the middle of it, how that is going to impact the neighboring communities, I'm not sure. But again, that's a part of the argument I don't want to go down. I think if any of you were here 20 years ago and involved in your town when this act was passed, I want to hear from you that you really thought at that time when you voted this in that the Cape Cod Commission could eventually be looking at areas of development of, and I take right out of their chart, residential from 0 to 30, 0 to 10, 0 to 15 in the village. If you really thought that when you voted in 20 years ago, that's what they were going to do. If you honestly believe that, then you should support this. But if you thought and you voted 20 years ago that it was going to take town meeting vote to change it again, then I think that's not a huge thing to ask us to do, to send this back. The only other thing I'd like to comment is that in Jessica's letter, she does say that the Cape Cod Commission feels that this would significantly delay a town's application. Well, you know something? So what? I mean, this is a huge change. This is not a zoning regulation. This is whether the Cape Cod Commission is going to be involved in a development. Right now, it's a 10,000 square foot building. It could be, in a specific area, a 2,500 square foot building. Whether you are pro the Cape Cod Commission involvement or against their involvement, this is a major change to their involvement. And I really think that we owe it to the voters and to those that do participate in town meeting to have the ability to decide whether they want to do it or not. And quite frankly, right now, so the public will be aware, the only thing that's being requested under Section 5-3 is that they hold one public hearing. And I'm a gentleman that has attended many public hearings. DCPC hearings, zoning hearings, many hearings. And the difference between a hearing and a town meeting is I get to stand up on the mic and say what I think, but my vote doesn't count. In town meeting, your vote counts. And many times, and I think many of the people at town of Harwich who I'm hope are watching this today, and I've said this at town meeting a number of times too, I construe town meeting as my Super Bowl. I really do. I enjoy it, I go there, I participate, and I ask everyone in our town to come and participate. If this passes town meeting, then all well and good. If it doesn't, then it shouldn't have passed then. And I'm hoping that you people will support me on this. And again, I'm prepared to make a motion. I won't make it as of yet until we have the discussion, but I am prepared to make a motion that we send it back as per Section 12D of the Cape Cod Commission Act for their specific review to Section 5-3 and having them look at having either town meeting or town council review it as part of their application. Thank you.
Well, I apologize because I wasn't here for the information, so this might be a stupid question, but was the intention, whether that would work out that way or not, of the Cape Cod Commission to allow revised DRA thresholds to maybe have things that were bigger than 10,000 square feet not have to go before the commission, as opposed to what I'm gathering Leo is talking about, that it would be a smaller number that might, I understand if it's open to revision, it's open to revision, but I just wanted to know, what was that the intention of the commission when they proposed this?
I can't speak to the intention. The intention of the commission was to allow them to change, it allows communities to petition to change the thresholds. And
my
I can't.
Last thinking on it was that it was so that it would be fewer things would have to go before the commission. Right. Does anyone have a theory about that? The feeling about
well,
that?
Were you there, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My understanding is that it works both ways. You
Yeah.
can lower the thresholds in certain designated areas, or as been pointed out by the delegate from Howard, if you want to go to a 30,000 square foot building to be exempt from review with certain conditions in a certain area, you could vote to go that way.
Yeah, Charlotte?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I discussed this with the town administrator in Yarmouth, and he and the Board of Selectmen are in agreement that it should stay a decision of the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, and the Zoning Board. In the town of Yarmouth, anything that changes zoning automatically goes before town meeting. So they're happy to have it as it is in here, that it is a decision of the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, and the Zoning Board of Appeals if necessary.
Okay. Do we have any other comments? Leo, you want to come?
Just specifically to that, and I think that's where the confusion is. This does not change zoning. If it changed zoning, I wouldn't have a problem with it, because you are right. The Attorney General requires that all zoning changes go in front of town meeting. This does not change zoning. And quite frankly, I think that I'm hoping that the people who are sitting in positions such as that the people who voted them there are listening to this, because what they're saying is, we don't want to give town meeting the authority. We have it. We want to keep the authority. And I strongly disagree with that.
Okay. Charlotte?
May I go to another point while we're talking about taking a vote? I, too, am sorry that I was not at the public hearing on this. But I note under Section 10, Appeal, that we're talking about a 3/4 vote, a 3/4 determination of the Assembly of Delegates if it were decided that the application had erred and it was to be sent back to the Assembly of Delegates, that it would be through a 3/4 determination for such error. My question is, how was this 3/4 determination decided on, and is it 3/4 of the weighted vote? I believe, as far as we're concerned in the charter, our votes are weighted. So is this 3/4 determination of the total weighted vote? My other question is, if this is where are the checks and balances?
Yeah, well,
I think we're missing checks and balances.
Actually, these were the 2 points of contention at the meeting. The one that was on the table now from Leo on the town meeting requirement, and the other one was the one you just addressed, which is the 3/4 requirement. I think I know the answer, but I'll let Diane answer for you.
Obviously, in order for the assembly to convene, you need a majority of you need at least 8 delegates present and more than 50% of the representative delegates. So if you have a quorum and there was a vote before the assembly to overturn the Cape Cod Commission, you'd need 3/4 of the delegates present to overturn the commission. Okay?
Okay, all right.
Of the weighted vote.
All right, fine.
So you don't need 3/4 of 100% if not everybody is present. You need 3/4 of those present.
So we have this 3/4 vote, and it's sent back to the Cape Cod Commission. And the commission, for a subsequent review and vote pursuant to Section 9.0, can decide, if I read this correctly, that they don't care what the Assembly of Delegates thinks about if they erred. And that they, if after we send it back, saying, we think you erred, they can say, we don't think we did, and so therefore, we're going to pass this application as it was presented to the Assembly. It appears to me that there's no, as I said, no checks and balances, and that it looks to me like a process that the Commission is looking to override the legislative body of the county. So Those are my thoughts on this. I don't agree with this 3/4 determination. I think it should be as we have done it in the past.
Tom, please, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was at that public hearing, and I think I was the one that brought up the 3/4. I'm not sure who did, but I spoke on it also. 3/4 is inconsistent with the procedures that we follow. We're always a supermajority, which is 2/3 vote. 3/4 vote, I think it's a problem in that there's one body or one town on the assembly that commands over 25%. Therefore, one individual could keep us from reaching that 3/4 vote. Not that, no offense to the great town of Barnstable, it's just that I feel that 2/3 is the way we have always operated. To go to 3/4 is extremely difficult to do. If the scenario lays out, and this is so that if a town, say, applied to the Cape Cod Commission to raise the threshold, and the commission disapproved, the town could come to us. We could then look at the facts, and if we found that the commission erred, that if 2/3 of us thought that the commission erred, we could remand it back for their consideration, but also demonstrate where we found the error. But 3/4, that's a very difficult number to achieve. I think that we should remain a supermajority, 2/3, as opposed to 3/4. I just think it's a number that was thrown out there for, I think personally, the benefit of the commission. I think the benefit should be towards the legislative body. And if 2/3 of us feel that there's an error, that should go forward.
Yes, Julia?
A question. If there were either 2/3 or 3/4 that disagreed with the commission, it doesn't automatically reverse and put it into effect for the town. It just sends it back for reconsideration. Right. In that case, if that were the case, then I would not be opposed to a 2/3, I guess, since it's...
Yeah, Tom.
May I follow? Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's not just that we feel that the commission was incorrect. We would have to demonstrate where the error occurred. So it's that the town has an opportunity to demonstrate to us that there was an error and that we have something to send to the commission for them not to just dismiss. I mean, if they want to dismiss it, that's up to them, but you turn into a political battle at that point. But it's a way of the town to say, look, something was missed here. So it's a remand back with the demonstration of an error.
The discussion that took place with the committee when we discussed this hinged on 2 points. One was that if we allowed, the commission felt if we allowed the lower number, 2/3, that we'd simply become an automatic appeals board. In other words, whoever felt that they were injured by the decision would say, oh, what the hell, we'll take our chances. What the heck, we would take our chances with the assembly. The other issue, and Tom touches on it, but we've had similar situations where for instance, the selectmen serve as a review board for our historic business district commission. The question is not whether the question, do you put yourself in the place of the commission and say, geez, we think differently, or do you review it for errors and say, wait a minute, you didn't follow proper procedure and therefore we're remanded back to you, and we've taken the tack that, at least I have, that we're a review process like an appeals board in court. We say, well, there was an inconsistency or there was an error in the process, and therefore you have to do it again, rather than simply say, well, you think this is good, but we don't, and we'll sort of change it. But that's the discussion that took place.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Was there any disagreement about the concept of changing these thresholds and allowing different thresholds? Were there people who felt, let's get real, we got to have these tough standards? Or were there people that said, oh, the standards are way too tough? Was that a big debate, or was it really only just these? Not at all. Most people are kind of in favor of some sort of... Most
of the discussion, I'd say 80% of it were on these two issues that we have on the table right now. Anybody else on this? I'd just like to say that a lot of this is a result of pressure by people who felt that the commission was too bureaucratic and too unwieldy. We started into a 21st century task force, all right, and they essentially looked at it. But at the end of the day, the process was driven by the stakeholders. It was never a public process. I don't think it was put to a vote. I don't think the changes that were made, which probably the most significant changes made since the original act were passed, were ever put before town meeting. They were never put before the ballot. They were basically approved by this body and the commissioners. So in that sense, I mean, I think that if there had been more public participation, it might not have, you know, the 21st Century Task Force might have had a much tougher time because, of course, they're dealing directly with the stakeholders, so they had to deal with the general population. The population to say, hey, we don't want to change it. You know, I mean, it could have gone that way, but it didn't. I know that a town meeting, I agree with Leo, you know, in a way, you want to be as democratic as possible, but I mean, the scenario that Charlotte sets out where you have the actual people who you empower who are versed in this to look at it, and of course the selectmen are elected, so they're responsible to the public, I think is an adequate process. A town meeting is expensive. We tend to not have them unless we have to, you know, and it's not an issue in Barnstable, but all the 14 towns, it costs you quite a few $1,000s, and unfortunately, the worst treatment, I think, of any articles that go before town meeting, it's articles that have to do with zoning and development and thresholds and things like this, the public, I mean, zoning article after zoning article has gone down in flames on town meeting, not because they were bad, but simply people didn't have the time to absorb it. So I think the process set up by the commission, although not perfect, is probably as good a process as we have. And but that's my 3.5% of the assembly.
Just to speak to that, the town of Yarmouth is 24,000, 28,000 people, and if we are able to get on the first night of town meeting 300 people, we are delighted. And I think that the thought that 300 people and probably, and I really shouldn't say this, but people do not understand zoning. I mean, you can, as a selectman, I sat on the stage for 9 years and watched people's eyes glaze over when they said, now we're going to discuss zoning articles. You know, they don't understand them. They have no idea. So to think that a group of people could come to a town meeting in Yarmouth and make a decision about Chapter H and whether threshold should be changed or not, they wouldn't know, you know, and so I just wonder myself if any other delegates talked with their town administrators and found out how their town felt, because I had no idea how the town of Yarmouth felt. So I went to Bob and we talked about it. So I would not vote to take this to town meetings.
Tom Keyes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The issue of taking this to town meeting or not, I've gone back and forth on this. You look at different scenarios of what could come up from this adoption of Chapter H, which I got to say, I'll say it, is I think a great adoption to the Cape Cod Commission Act. I was a member of the 21st Century Task Force, and this will help to expedite without losing control of development. So this is a great program. I commend them. They did a great job, except for these two issues. As for going to town meeting, think of the likely scenario. More than likely, towns will not apply to lower thresholds from 10,000 square feet to 2,000 square feet. More than likely, towns will apply to go from 10,000 square feet to, say, 25 or 30, whatever the number will be, in a certain economic area, whatever that means. It could be a downtown district for revitalization. It could be an outlying area where you have more of the industrial park setting. In either case, there will be abutting properties. There could be entire communities that will now sit next to somewhere that has a 30,000 square foot threshold as opposed to 10,000. It could change a portion of your town, whether it be the south side, the north side, the downtown. And thinking about that, I really think that the neighbors or the town should have a way to vote on that, because it could significantly change what happens in that district. The town applying is the Board of Selectmen, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the town planners. They're the ones that are going to apply. Really, it's the planning department is going to apply for whatever they're looking for. And it won't be done in a large audience. It'll be done for good reason, I'm sure, but without a lot of people knowing about it. And going to town meeting, I think, is that opportunity for everyone to discuss it. Remember, the Cape Cod Commission doesn't get flack for being not stringent enough. Typically, people that come out against the commission is because they want some relief, some better development, economic opportunities. That's what this is all about. So I think people coming to town meeting would be able to, one, say, look, I live in this area, I don't want this economic development, but at the same time, those individuals that have been, you know, consistently against the commission, I think they'll come out and they'll speak in favor of it. So I think this is a positive in every way, and considering what it can do to certain areas of towns, I think it's important that it should go before town meeting. I can tell you, Town of Sandwich, we have typically 2 town meetings a year. 6 months in between another town meeting is probably the minimum amount of time you'd need even to get this going and get it started and get it ready. So I don't think it's overly burdensome to have to wait 6 months, or possibly even a year, for something I think that's so long-term and long-standing as what this possible change could make. So I stand in favor of adoption of this Section H, but I still have concerns on these 2 areas. I do believe it should be 2/3 majority to be consistent, and I do support my colleague here of this should go to town meeting. Thank you.
Any other comments, Tom?
Well, I agree with much of what the delegate from Sandwich just said. You know, I think there will be times where towns may wish to lower the thresholds because you don't want to see certain development in areas, and you may use this as a tool to say, look, up to now it would take 10,000 square feet to, you know, trigger the commission, but you may want the commission on your side to actually say, look, we'd like to see much smaller scale development. This would like to move it into a downtown area or an industrial area or other areas where you're trying to direct growth. So I wouldn't minimize that aspect, because I would hope good planning would bring about economic development where the community wants to see it. As it relates to, you know, a possible amendment on the town meeting vote, Barnstable doesn't fall under that. So I would abstain on that, because I think the issue really falls to the other 14 towns that have, you know, town meeting votes, and you have to decide if whether in your community you think this is an issue you'd want to bring it forward on. But since we're somewhat exempt from it, I won't be participating in that particular amendment, although I will vote on the final package. Thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else? Leo, do you want to have another comment or whatever?
Well, I have a brief comment, then I'd like to bring a motion forward. My comment is that my 2 colleagues that said that they feel comfortable with the fact that the selectmen and the planning board are adequate enough to review this, yet they don't see the need that 300 people would have much of an impact on it, I think is bizarre at the best. I mean, most selectmen, most planning board members, most zoning board of appeal members are people from the community. People who have maybe some educated background in planning, but sometimes, many times, they don't. They're just there giving their time, as we are here, giving our time back to the community to do something. And I think if 300 people show up at the town meeting, those 300 should have a say in this, and I support it. And after hearing some of my colleagues, I would like to also say again publicly to the town of Harwich, thank you. Because obviously the town of Harwich does take its town meeting very seriously. And when zoning articles do come up, and again, this is not a zoning article, but when zoning articles do come up at town meeting, people show up very well informed, with very good concerns, and very good either support or against things. And I'm proud to say that for my town. With that said, I would like to make a motion that we return Ordinance 09-11, Chapter H, to the Cape Cod Commission for its review, specifically to Section 5-3 regarding town meeting and/or town council vote as part of the requirement, and Section 10 regarding the 3/4 vote, which should be 2/3 as per the Assembly standards.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Is there any further comment on this motion from any of the other delegates? Leo?
The only thing is, Mr. Speaker, and this is just as far as procedure, I took it upon myself to write that motion. I believe that that is the proper motion. Again, I fully defend the Chapter H. I think it's great. I think it's a good tool. But I strongly believe that, that the requirements of this should, in fact, include town meeting and/or town council. And again, I agree with some of the colleagues' concerns, and I think it needs to be really looked at as far as the 3/4 or 2/3 vote.
Yeah, Charlotte?
Myself personally, I think it should be two separate motions, because
Right.
I cannot accept the motion as given that it be returned to the Cape Cod Commission and the 3/4 vote. I agree with I disagree with the 3/4 vote. I think it should be a 2/3 vote.
Leo,
so.
Charlotte's point is well taken. I saw these as two separate issues, and if what you're saying is that you want the commission to come back with changes, but we don't know that the delegates agree with both of those changes. I mean, if, for instance, if someone agreed with you on the town meeting and didn't agree with you on the other one, they might vote against it.
Which is what
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I don't have a problem out of hearing that. I will take back my motion if somebody would take back the second who made the second, and I'd be prepared to make two motions.
Okay,
then.
so you withdraw your motion.
I withdraw the motion.
Withdraw the second. Okay, and now you
Now I'll
correct the
prepare to
motion.
make two motions, and I'll
Excuse
make
me
the
one moment.
first, if you like.
Can I just interject for one moment?
Go ahead.
We're going to want one motion to send it back, from what I'm hearing, for restudy and redrafting, which means the ordinance doesn't get approved, obviously.
If this passes.
However, so there's really one motion that's needed, and then the Cape Cod Commission is directed as to what you want it to look at. It's not, I think it's helpful, this is just my own personal opinion, if there are issues by delegates or concerns within the document that the Cape Cod Commission is aware of all of the issues that people may have that are in the ordinance. So I guess what I'm trying to say... No, I'm really looking for one motion to send it back for restudy and redrafting, if that's the majority vote of the Assembly. And then what I think would be helpful for the Cape Cod Commission would be to have a list of areas that the Assembly would like the Commission to look at. Now, maybe you don't want to take my suggestion on that.
Well, you mean what we're saying is we can't specifically tell them, come back and make these changes?
You cannot tell them to make the changes. You can only send it back and ask them to look at these issues. So you cannot require them.
Well, yeah, I don't think we can require them. I understand about the motion is just to send it back. It might be useful to have a straw vote after the motion or before that just gave a feeling for our people, what do people feel really strongly about, or is it
Well,
not be acceptable to have a straw vote?
I don't know if I would take a straw vote before a regular vote. That's kind of outside of usual parliamentary procedure. But I agree, and I'm sorry we're not giving Leo better guidance here, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason why I made the motion as I did is because under the Cape Cod Commission Act, Section 12, it does in fact say that the higher standards which are being proposed, and this is what Jessica has referred to as their ability to change the standards. This particularly says higher, but we'll ignore that for now. By ordinance shall be returned. By propose or return the proposed standards and criteria to the Commission for restudy and redraft. In the event the Assembly has objections to the proposed standards and criteria, the Assembly shall return the proposed standards and criteria to the Commission together with a written report identifying the elements of which the Assembly has objection to or wants to see changed. That's why I made my original motion only specific to the two areas that we were discussing here today. I certainly don't have a problem separating those two, but I just hope that if the first one doesn't pass and the second one does, I want our colleagues to understand that it's my understanding that we cannot change this document. We either have to accept it as it is or send it back with our written or at least specific of areas that we would like revisited.
And could I add one more thing?
Go ahead.
I also heard Delegate Strebel raise a question about procedure in Section 10. And that's why I'm trying to funnel out what the questions are. What I heard from Delegate Strebel is the question, in addition to the two that have had the greatest amount of discussion, is if there's an appeal process by a town and it comes to the assembly, and by whatever vote deemed appropriate, the 2/3 or 3/4, it gets sent back to the commission. The commission could say, well, we don't agree with the assembly. What happens then? That's the question I heard from Delegate Strebel, and I looked at the ordinance, and it isn't clear. So to me, that was sort of a third issue that I heard raised that somebody might want to have the commission look at, seeing it's going back, it appears, for restudy and redrafting.
Yep. Liam.
Just to move this forward, this is what I would be prepared to do. I would like to, I'll make a motion, first of all, to send it back for the town meeting section. If that fails, then I'll make a motion to send it back for the 2/3 section, and if that fails, I'll make a motion to send it back for the other third thing.
Go ahead.
If that fails, I'll make a motion that we accept it. Okay? So right now, I'd like to make a motion that we return Ordinance 09-11, Chapter H, Section, to the Cape Cod Commission for its review, specifically to Section 5-3, regarding the town meeting and/or town council vote as part of the requirement to adopt the new thresholds.
Okay, do I hear a second on that? Second, okay.
Now, under discussion?
Yes, go ahead.
I believe that if this is passed, the rest of the delegates will have an opportunity to bring forward additional motions specifying other sections that they are concerned about. So if this passes,
Then we won't need a motion.
it's going back. I believe we should take a motion on that, so it will be written. And if there are any other areas that you are concerned about.
Amendments to his motion right now, if there are other areas to be considered.
Well, let's, yeah, I see where you're going with this, Leo. Is there any other further comment on this, Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just would like to say that I've been attending town meetings for 40 years in New Hampshire, Vermont, Cape Cod, and I think that there have been numerous times with zoning issues and others that town meeting has exhibited wisdom over and above the elected officials. So I support this motion.
Well, I have been also attended a lot of town meetings, and I've seen, I've seen zoning issues go down. I mean, there's a point, you know, democracy is great, but if you're going to launch a nuclear missile, you don't go to the voters and decide how to build it. I mean, there's a certain point in democracy where the voters really, you know, pass on the responsibility of people because they have lives. They do things. They're grocers.
You should ask them when to launch it, though.
No, they're grocers. They're builders. They're carpenters. And if you come to them with too much stuff and you ask them to look at a zoning article, they're going to look back at you and say, "Hey, that's what we have you for," you know. And so that's my attitude. I mean, you know, it's one thing if you want to build a new building or send an expense, but you get to a certain point with issues that the town meeting has demonstrated in the past that it doesn't have the patience or even the intention of going into the depth of understanding that it takes to pass these articles. So I mean, to my feeling, and I don't want to start ranting here, but if you go to town meeting, I guarantee that most of these are going to, in other words, it's going to slow the process. If a town feels that it should raise those thresholds because it has a project in mind and it has to go to town meeting, it's going to, first of all, automatically delay it until the next town meeting, and then they stand a very good chance that people are going to shoot it down. So this, to me, this is an anti-development amendment. If we pass this, it's going to, and you know, there's a lot of people in my town who would love that, but I think if we say it has to go to town meeting, it's basically going to crimp the ability to establish you know, regions of economic development on the Cape. So that's how I feel about it. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. At least in my town, I was like Leo at the meeting and was chairman of the finance committee at the time. And I think the problem here is that the thresholds were foundational in the way that the Cape Cod Commission Act was sold at town meeting. So it was a very important piece of it was the way the thresholds were set in people's minds as they voted. So that's the reason I feel like if the thresholds are going to change, those same people ought to have the same opportunity to vote it, because it was a piece of legislation and the information was presented in a certain way that these thresholds were set and people didn't have to worry about their small business or whatever. So that's the reason I feel like it should go back to town meeting.
Okay, is there any further comment from the Assembly? So we'll take a vote on the motion. You repeat you have the motion written?
I believe the motion is to send this back to the Cape Cod Commission for redrafting and restudying to take a look at Section 5-3 and consider the inclusion of requiring town meeting,
All right.
a town meeting vote, correct?
Yeah.
No.
We're going to have to call a roll on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we should, yes.
Yeah.
Richard Anderson?
Yes.
Ronald Bergstrom?
No.
George Bryant?
Yes.
Leo Kukunas?
Yes.
Christopher Kanega?
Yes.
Thomas Keys?
Yes.
Marcia King? Thomas Lynch?
Abstain.
Teresa Martin?
Yes.
Paul Pilcher?
Yes.
Anthony Scalise?
Yes.
Fred Schill?
Yes.
Charlotte Striebel?
No.
Julia Taylor?
No.
I just think we've never had any changes to the act that have to do with maintenance. I just too keen on going this direction. I don't think it's pleasing to me at this point. We've had this act a long time.
Okay, just want to make sure they all added up. By a vote of 42.45% of the delegates voting yes, 28.84% of the delegates voting no, 21.52% of the delegates voting present, and we have 7.19% absent, the motion passes.